Back everybody. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at exporting a normal map from our two pieces of geometry. In the last lesson, we went ahead and created a high poly and a low poly polygonal model of a crate. So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to go ahead and attempt to create a normal map. Now we're going to do this kind of roughly. Our normal map's not going to be 100% perfect, but that's okay. So one of the first things we want to do is I want to make sure both my objects are pretty close in size. You'll notice the low poly object has some extrusions in it. It's not simply a box. I also put bevels on it. I ran a UV unwrap on that, so I made sure I did that. Now I'm in the rendering menu in Maya, and before I get started, I'm going to actually delete all my history here, and I'm going to have my low poly selected and go to Lighting/Shading, Transfer Maps. Here, let's reset some of these settings. We're going to go ahead and have our low poly shape, and we'll get to this envelope here in a second. And we're going to do our source mesh, which is our high poly shape. And we're going to hit normal and change our format to, in this case, maybe a TIFF. And we can call this crate map. So we have that. And now that we have our crate map, we're going to go to the Maya Common tab, and let's enter some values. 512 by 512. We'll keep it set to, let's go to a medium quality just to make sure it works first. And I have my filter size and seams set to 3 and 1. I'm also going to go into mental ray common output, and just for sake of baking, I'm going to go ahead and raise those to 512 to match what we have up here. Finally, I want to use an envelope, because if I bake this right now, I'm going to lose some data. Let's go ahead and just bake it, and let's see what we get. So I'm running through the baking process, and it happens relatively quickly. And when I move this, you'll notice I get some visual errors. One of the first things I see is actually on the top. I'm not getting that board that's going across. So if I render this, you'll see it. It's not calculating that board. I'm also getting some pretty darn crazy visual errors. Now, some of these dark points are just mainly because of the way we laid out those UVs with the automatic mapping. And that's okay for starters. Like, we can go and we'll fix our UVs later. But let's start again, and let's run through the same process, lighting and shading, transfer maps. This time, let's add an envelope. So if we add an envelope, what we want to do is we want to make this envelope encompass all of the geometry. You can see here some of that geometry is poking through. So we want to make sure that it is not poking through and push it to its content. This side definitely is not, so I'm going to need more. So let's do maybe 1.5. And we're going to go to cover it all. 2 may be a good number. Yep, 2 is probably what we're going to get. And that's encompassing all the geometry. All right, now that we have that, I'm going to change the name to crate map 1 just so we can figure the difference out. We'll check our settings again. And this time at the bottom, we're going to use closest to envelope still and geometry normals. Let's see what this gives us. So we'll run our bake again. And let's see if there's any difference here. I grab the low res mesh. Let's pull it out. First thing you see is that dark side, the error I had, is fixed. I'm getting nice geometry on each element, and more importantly, I'm getting that board there at the top. Now, it's okay if you don't see this directly in your viewport. Your viewport's not really built to handle these normal maps. Game Engine would. If I change my renderer to high quality, you'll see that we actually have a nice bake and we have something going on. So, and now the trick is when we go to render it, it's going to look a little shoddy. You know, you're going to want to be careful of that. I can change my renderer to my hardware, and it will give me a more accurate representation. And there are some areas in which I could amplify, but overall, that's a pretty successful bake. We could adjust some of the settings further, but I'm kind of happy with what we have. So to see our normal map, first we've saved it using transfer maps, but I'm going to highlight my geometry and go to the shader, or Lambert 2 in my case, bump mapping, and I'm going to click this little symbol, and my normal map will load here. Now, normal maps can be adjusted within your viewer. First, let's view it. Let's see what it looks like. You can see it's pretty good. If we zoom in on this, without me moving it here, you'll notice that some of those other areas where the crate were really captured well, but we're still getting some awkward areas here. That would be done in a later process. We could kind of clean that up. For now, I can play with the exposure of my map. That helps, and I can also play with the color gain in efforts to maybe get it stronger or less strong. You can see obviously I turned it down way too much, so we want to kind of keep that in mind as we go forward. So that's a quick way to make a normal map, and just to show you that normal mapping a whole crate does work. I could go ahead and screen grab this and render this out. I'm going to take my grid off real quick so you can see. If I turn off my wireframe unshaded, you can see I have again, a pretty decent representation of my box. The more important and the cooler thing is later on when we go to lights, let's go to light mode here and hit 7 on my keyboard. Normal maps definitely look better once lights are involved. So keep that in mind when you see them in your viewport. You can see definitely this looks a heck of a lot better. Plus we don't have a texture on this yet. When we have a texture on it, we'll get more depth that we're looking for and so forth. So hopefully you enjoyed your lesson. Remember, 6 is your texture mode. I don't know if I said that out loud, but that's what it is. And look forward to seeing your normal maps.